Underneath Central Parkway in Cincinnati, Ohio, there are two parallel concrete tubes, each about 15 feet high and 13 feet wide, running for just over 2 miles. They contain platforms 300 feet long, stations with tiled walls, and curves banked for trains that were supposed to lean into them at speed. No train has ever entered these tunnels. No passenger has ever stood on those platforms. The system was built between 1920 and 1927, and it has been empty for a century. $6 million. That was the price tag voters approved in 1916 by a margin of almost 6-1. Not a slim victory, not a contested mandate. The people of Cincinnati looked at a plan to build a 16-mile rapid transit loop connecting downtown to the neighborhoods fanning out across the basin and the hills, and they said yes with a force that politicians dream about. The bond money was raised, the engineers were hired, and then the United States entered World War I, and Congress passed a law prohibiting municipalities from selling bonds during wartime. So the money sat. The plans sat. The canal that was supposed to become the subway sat, still full of water, still stinking. That canal, the Miami and Erie, is where the whole story starts. It opened in segments between 1825 and 1845, a waterway running from Cincinnati to Toledo, carrying grain and lumber and passengers on flatboats through the interior of Ohio. For a few decades it mattered. Then the railroads came, and the canal didn't. By the 1870s, the lower section through Cincinnati was effectively dead. The water stagnated. Residents dumped garbage into it, mosquitoes bred in the shallow pools. The muddy canal bed, cutting directly through the heart of the city, became an open sewer separating the German immigrant neighborhood of Over the Rhine from the business district downtown. In 1884, a weekly magazine called the Cincinnati Graphic published an illustration. Trains running underground through the old canal bed, a wide boulevard built on top. The caption called the canal a dead old ditch. The image showed something clean and modern replacing it. That illustration sat in people's minds for nearly 30 years. By 1910, Cincinnati was one of the 7 most populous cities in the country. Its growth rate and economic output were compared to New York and Chicago. 9 interurban rail lines converged on the city. Electric streetcars, adopted starting in 1888, crawled through streets shared with horse-drawn wagons, pedestrians, and the growing swarm of automobiles. Collisions between streetcars and cars happened almost daily. The streets were cobblestone or unpaved, and there were no traffic signals, no stop signs, no speed limits. Downtown was choking. Mayor Henry T. Hunt appointed a commission in March 1912 to find a solution. The commission raised a little over $10,000 from the Commercial Association, the Businessmen's Club, and the Chamber of Commerce, and hired a Chicago engineer named Bion J. Arnold. Arnold had worked on the electrification of Grand Central Terminal in New York. He had solved overcrowding problems on the Interborough Rapid Transit line. He knew subways. He produced 6 plans for Cincinnati, and in his most favorable report, he noted something peculiar. The city was technically too small to justify a subway, but its topography, a basin ringed by steep hills, made it an exception. The hills funneled all traffic into a compressed downtown. A loop of rapid transit could relieve that pressure in a way no surface system could. The plan that emerged by 1914, refined in the Baldwin-Edwards report, called for 16 miles of track. Underground through the old canal bed downtown, surfacing at Brighton and running above ground to St. Bernard and Norwood, then looping back through Oakley and along the Ohio River bluffs on an elevated railway, returning to Fountain Square. Subway, surface, and elevated, all on one continuous loop. The canal bed was the key. You drain it, lay concrete tubes in the trench, build a boulevard on top, and you've solved 2 problems at once: the open sewer and the transit crisis. On July 1st, 1919, The canal's water was diverted over the Spring Grove spillway. The lower section through Cincinnati went dry for the last time. On January 28, 1920, a steam shovel lifted the first scoop of earth from the canal bed at Walnut Street. The subway was finally real. Workers began laying reinforced concrete tubes in the drained trench, working north from downtown. The method was supposed to be straightforward. You're building in a ditch that already exists, not boring through rock. But straightforward is a word that doesn't survive contact with Cincinnati politics. By early 1921, the inflation that skeptics had warned about arrived. Construction costs jumped. The $6 million that was supposed to build 16 miles could now build only 11. The entire eastern half of the loop, the section from Oakley through Hyde Park and back into downtown, was eliminated. The loop became a line. Then came the negotiations with neighboring municipalities. The cities of St. Bernard and Norwood delayed the project for more than a year over right-of-way disputes. Residents in Brighton filed complaints that blasting for the tunnel was damaging their homes, halting work for over 2 months in 1922. State auditors questioned the construction procedures and the financial records. The 2 miles of underground tunnel were finished by early 1923. The concrete tubes ran beneath what would become Central Parkway from near Walnut Street downtown to a point just north of the Western Hills Viaduct. 3 underground stations were built: Race Street, Liberty Street, and Brighton Place. Race Street Station was the largest, an island platform with 3 tracks designed as the central hub where lines would branch toward Norwood and toward the riverfront. It contained one of the sharpest curves in subway design, a tight bend where the tunnel swung north. The station was complete. The platforms were complete. The wooden rail ties were in place, banked at the curves. Everything was ready for track to be laid and trains to run. No track was ever laid. Above ground, the picture was the same pattern of almost. Several miles of surface right-of-way were graded. 3 above-ground stations were built at Marshall Avenue, Ludlow Avenue, and Clifton Avenue. But critical connections between the underground and surface sections were missing. The money was gone. By 1927, the bond fund was nearly at zero, and the Rapid Transit Board estimated it would take another $9 to $10 million to finish the system, roughly double the original appropriation, adjusted for inflation. Murray Seasongood had seen enough. The newly elected mayor was a reformer, part of the charter committee movement that had just swept the old political machine out of power. Seasongood transferred control of the transit project from the county to the city, looked at the numbers, and in 1928 dissolved the Rapid Transit Board entirely. The subway was dead. What opened instead in October 1928 was Central Parkway, a broad, divided boulevard built on top of the subway right-of-way using land that had been purchased for the transit loop. Cars drove over the tunnels. The tunnels stayed empty below. The platforms at Race Street Station gathered their first layer of dust. Then the stock market crashed. The Great Depression made the $9 million gap feel like a fantasy from another century. But the tunnels didn't go away, and neither did the ideas. In 1936, the Cincinnati Engineers Club proposed routing the city's trolleys through the subway. The trolley cars turned out to be too long for the tunnel's sharp curves. In 1939, city manager C.O. Sherrill suggested converting the tunnels to automobile traffic, but the cost was prohibitive and the tubes were only 13 feet wide, barely enough for a single lane in each direction with no room for breakdowns. In 1941, the United States entered World War II, and all discussion of the subway stopped. After the war, the City Planning Commission simply left the subway out of its plans. No vote, no formal announcement. The subway was not canceled again, it was just no longer mentioned. In the 1950s, the city found a use for one of the tunnels that had nothing to do with transit. Cincinnati Water Works installed a water transmission main through the subway in 1957, threading a large pipe through a passage built for electric trains. It was cheaper than digging a new trench. The pipe has leaked on and off for decades. Then came the interstate. In 1961, construction of Interstate 75 tore through the corridor north of the subway tunnels. The three above-ground stations, Marshall Avenue, Ludlow Avenue, Clifton Avenue, were demolished to make room for the highway. Significant portions of the planned surface route were paved over. The highway that replaced the transit loop carried cars, not trains, and it carried them out of the city, into the suburbs, accelerating the population decline that would define Cincinnati for the next half-century. The platforms at Race Street Station gathered another layer of dust. A water pipe dripped somewhere in the dark. The proposals kept coming, each one more improbable than the last. A bottling plant, a fallout shelter. In the 1950s, civil defense equipment was actually stored in Brighton Station, an underground shopping mall, a nightclub, a massive wine cellar, a grain malting operation. Each idea arrived, was discussed, and evaporated. The tunnels had become a civic inkblot test. Everyone saw something different in them, and no one could agree long enough to do anything. In 2002, a ballot measure called Metro Moves proposed building a network of light rail lines across Hamilton County. 5 lines, streetcars, commuter trains, and at the center of the plan, finally, the renovation of the subway tunnels beneath Central Parkway. The 3 underground stations at Race Street, Liberty Street, and Brighton would be reopened, refurbished, and put into service for the first time. John Schneider chaired the campaign. The plan would have connected the west side of downtown along Wires 74, run trains through the tunnels that had waited 80 years, and linked Cincinnati to the kind of rail network that cities like Portland and San Francisco already had. Voters rejected Metro Moves by a 2-to-1 margin, the same ratio, nearly inverted, as the 1916 vote that built the subway in the first place. Former Mayor Mark Mallory once estimated that more than 40% of Cincinnatians don't know the tunnels exist. They drive Central Parkway every day, over 2 miles of reinforced concrete containing platforms and stations and banked curves, and they have no idea. The tunnels have been continuously maintained. John Loganbill, a city engineering technician, has overseen their upkeep for years, and engineers believe they could remain structurally sound for another century. A 2007 study confirmed that modern rail vehicles could fit inside them. The bones are there. They have always been there. Public tours, run by the Cincinnati Museum Center, used to sell out immediately. Tickets cost around $50. People descended through access points near Race Street and walked the platforms in hard hats, photographing tiled walls and wooden rail ties that had never felt the weight of steel. In 2015, a city risk assessment declared the tunnels unsafe for public access. The tours stopped. Most entrances are now gated or sealed with concrete. Urban explorers still find their way in, posting photographs of dust-covered platforms, graffiti on station walls, and the constant low sound of water dripping from the pipe that was never supposed to be there. In late 2024, the city issued a request for information, an RFI, titled Subway Tunnel Repurposing. City Manager Cheryl Long acknowledged the tunnels as a unique, underutilized asset and noted significant challenges with ventilation and infrastructure. Design firms responded with proposals ranging from a subterranean bathhouse to a restored canal waterway to a route for small autonomous vehicles. One submission proposed finishing the subway. The platforms at Race Street Station are still 300 feet long. The curves are still banked. The wooden ties are still in place, a little more warped than they were in 1923, waiting in the dark beneath the traffic and the parkway and the city that built them and never came back.